You know, there's a public health crisis happening right now, and it's hiding in plain sight. It doesn't always make the big headlines, but the numbers, well, the numbers tell an urgent and honestly a heartbreaking story. Today, we're going to unpack the data on suicide in America, and what we found is a staggering disparity that is absolutely demanding our attention.
So, let's just dive right in with this statement that really stopped me in my tracks. It's from California's governor, Gavin Newsom. For a governor to single out one group so specifically, that's a really powerful and, frankly, an unusual move. So you have to ask, what prompted such an urgent declaration?
Well, it wasn't just talk. Newsom recently signed an executive order, one aimed directly at supporting men and boys. The whole goal is to lower suicide rates and help them feel less isolated. And that kind of state-level action, it really forces us to zoom out and look at the bigger picture.
And that's the real question, isn't it? Is this just a problem happening in one state? Or is what California is doing just a local response to a much, much larger nationwide crisis? To get that answer, we have to look at the data.
So to figure this out, we've got to look at the national numbers. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC, they give us the clearest picture of what's happening across the entire country. And I'm telling you, the numbers, they're staggering.
Okay, get this. Nearly 50,000 lives were lost to suicide in just a single year. To try and wrap your head around that, that's more people than can fit into most Major League Baseball stadiums. But it's not just the total number that's so shocking.
It's the frequency. A death by suicide happens in the U.S. once every 11 minutes. Think about that. That's a constant, tragic rhythm happening in communities everywhere, around the clock.
And if we look at the trend, you can really see the story of this crisis. There's this long, troubling climb for almost 2 decades, and it hits a peak in 2018. And yeah, there was this brief, hopeful dip in 2020, but by 2022, bam, the rate shot right back up to that historic high. This just shows the problem isn't going away. In fact, it's getting worse again.
And here's the very latest, which puts it all into sharp relief. Based on the numbers we have so far, suicide has just moved up the ranks. It is now the 10th leading cause of death in the entire country.
Okay, so we've established the scale of the problem. It's huge. But now we need to look inside those numbers, because when you do, a massive gender disparity just jumps right out. This, right here, is the data that likely pushed Governor Newsom to sign that executive order.
And this is where it gets incredibly stark. The suicide rate among males is about 4 times higher than the rate for females. Let me just say that again, because it's so important. Not 40% higher, 400% higher.
And this chart really drives that point home in a different way. Men make up about half of the U.S. population, right? Makes sense. But they account for nearly 80% of all suicide deaths. The takeaway here is just, it's undeniable. This is a crisis that is disproportionately affecting men.
So the big question is why? Why is there such a massive gender gap? Well, to even begin to understand that, we have to look at the methods used. And the data is crystal clear that one method in particular is, by far, the most common and the most lethal.
According to the CDC, firearms were used in more than half of all suicides last year. More than half. That makes them the single biggest factor in suicide deaths in the United States. And as we're about to see, this plays a huge role in that gender gap we were just talking about.
Now, here's something that I think a lot of people might not realize. We often associate firearm suicide with men, and, for good reason. But pretty recently, firearms also became the leading method of suicide for women, actually surpassing poisoning. That just highlights how lethal and how prevalent this method has become for everyone.
And for men, this isn't some static problem that's just staying the same. The data shows a really clear and troubling trend. The rate of suicide involving a firearm has been climbing, and climbing steadily for well over a decade now.
Okay, so let's pull all of these threads together. What does this mountain of data actually tell us? Who is most at risk here? What's clear is that this crisis touches every single stage of life. For young people, I'm talking age 10 all the way up to 34, it's the second leading cause of death. But then look all the way to the far right of the chart. The group with the absolute highest suicide rate? Men aged 85 and older. It just shows you, this is a lifespan issue.
So when you put it all together, the picture is it's undeniable. We're at a historic high for suicide rates. Men are dying at a rate 4 times higher. They account for almost 80% of the deaths. Firearms are the most common method, and it affects boys, young men, middle-aged men, and our oldest citizens. This is the data that leads people like Governor Newsom to take action.
And so, we're left with this. The numbers are clear, the trends are really worrying, and the stakes, well, they couldn't be higher. We've seen the data, and just acknowledging this silent crisis is the first step. The urgent question now is, what happens next?